So how many people have never been to a living room talks? Okay, so that's like half the room or so. Okay, this is awesome. So, so I started this community project a couple of months ago, and the idea of the project is that I wanted to learn from the people around me. So the thing is, like, sometimes I've known friends for, let's say, many years, and I may not know that they have some very special interest or something that they can, or some like really interesting experience that they can share with other people. And so this is an event where basically you can give a mini TED Talk among friends. And so, so we've had 3 events so far, and some of the topics range from anywhere from IVF, which is like creating babies in a lab, to last time we had a friend who she took a sabbatical from Uber, and she moved to Syria and then started a coding school at one of the refugee camps. And then, you know, my first talk was about investing in timberland as an asset class, so basically buying land and planting trees on it. So the topics have been just very wide-ranging. And so last time Yao reached out and said that she would love to host living room talks down in South Bay. And so I was super excited for her to do that. And so I'll let you take it over from here.
Okay, cool. Welcome everyone. So I think I know Joy, and then Joy, we've been knowing each other for a few years. And then Jason is Joy's friends, and I think it's early July, Joy invited me to Jason's event, and the living room talks, I got really inspired. It's really exciting, so I feel like, oh, this cannot just only happen in San Francisco. South Bay is also cool. We have cool people here. Yeah, like Australia, right? Yeah, so I decided to have this here, and then invited Jason, and some people, they attended the last living room talks, and just come here and meet new friends and learn something. So yeah, hope you just enjoy the time here. Cool. Basically, I think I scheduled 4 speakers this time. Maybe I want to just make it a little bit shorter instead of longer sessions. So Ricky is going to be one. So I don't know their topics. I have no idea. I think I just want to make it like a surprise, so you guys can surprise us. Ricky, Xinghai, Alice, and Axel, they're going to be today's speakers. But we can also have 3 speakers if you just want to speak. You can just come up and speak. So I think Axel will be the first person.
Oh, you will be the first one.
I don't want to. I've been designed.
Okay, let's just come here.
How many minutes do we have?
I'm too tall for this thing.
You can find it on Pornhub.
Actually, that's it.
I'm going to do the cool manager thing.
Okay.
Why don't you?
So let me tell you all about it. So, this thing recording. Oh Jesus, this is.
But I love that this is in a proper living room instead of my actual dining room.
So actually, hello everyone. My name is Axel, not Alex. So quick few things about myself. I'm French. I was born in France and immigrated 7 years ago. I'm polyamorous, meaning that I have several partners who all know about each other, and I practice ethical consensual relationships, and that's one of the big aspects of what I'm going to talk about today. And I also happen to be pansexual, which is really fun, meaning that it's like bisexual, but you kind of don't recognize there are only 2 genders. And you're also potentially attracted to all the spectrum. And I also happen to identify as intersectional feminist, meaning that I embrace this branch of feminism that sees all the systems of oppression in society as their own particular bias inducing systems, and when they intersect, they create yet another experience entirely, and that's fascinating to talk about. But the reason why I mention all these things is because they actually all get very deeply intertwined in what I'm going to talk about today. So the reason why I have actually discovered and started practicing polyamory a year ago, and the reason why I started investigating it was not because I wanted to be polyamorous. It was because I immediately identified the tools that these people were using the communication tools that were mandatory. if you want several partners, if you want to make sure everybody's needs are met in the best of your capabilities, you need excellent communication skills. If you fail at that, you're gonna hurt someone. it's gonna happen. There is no way out. And I love that idea. I wanted a monogamous relationship, but I wanted to be able to have this strength in order to be able to keep my monogamous relationship as long as possible. And so I started educating myself. I met amazing people. I built very good relationships. And now I'm kind of like in a place where I'm like, wait a minute, actually people are not objects, and I cannot just become monogamous because all the people in my life are actually people, not objects I can dispose of. So I kind of stuck there because ethically speaking, I cannot possibly be monogamous anymore without breaking a few hearts, and that's definitely not something I want to do anyway. So here I am, being polyamorous fully forever. So one of the tools I wanted to start with, which is like completely separate for polyamory. It's been designed-ish, but I think it's mostly been agglomerated by a person named Marshall Rosenberg. The tool itself is called nonviolent communication. So Rosenberg grew up in the 50s, 60s in Detroit during the big riots and a bunch of stuff. He's Jewish and white, and he's seen a lot of violence in the streets. And he developed this quite radical notion about communication, and I've learned about these, and they are daily useful to me, even in especially in my professional environment, like trying to work with a bunch of engineers who usually are white men, that with all the toxicity that goes with it, is like riddled with ego and not understanding what emotions are, is extremely important to be able to separate the things from a good technical decision from an emotionally riddled, egocentric political game that plagues most of the tech companies, in my opinion. Anyway, more of NVC, as we call it. So you're gonna hear a lot of like the acronyms. Like this is the thing polyamorous people do all the time. I don't know why. I think it's just the tools or whatever. But the point is, nonviolent communication comes from this radical notion that emotions happen to everyone. They're okay. No emotion is intrinsically bad. However, only the person who experiences the emotion is responsible for them. You do not make someone feel something. At no point in your life are you in a place where it's okay to blame someone for making you feel something. And it seems kind of obvious when you say it like this, but actually if you dig into any sort of human interaction, I'm pretty sure all of you have been into, it's never been that obvious, like being like, you hurt me when you did that. No, actually. Or you made me jealous when you kissed that person in front of me. No, that is not what happened. You kissed a person in front of me, that is a fact. I was jealous, that is another fact. The first one was a trigger, but not who chose to be jealous. It's the person who chose to be jealous, who was jealous. And then there is yet another thing, which is once you've been jealous, are you just going to feel it or are you going to act on it? And these are, once again, completely different things. And that's why, and the problem with jealousy especially, that it's very often conflated in the way that people think that polyamorous people who are successful at having a relationship without jealousy are non-jealous people who are incapable of experiencing this emotion. That is not the case. What they are capable of doing is not acting on them. Like instead of like yelling or accusing someone, retreat and recenter yourself, reground yourself, and see what needs are being met. More on this later. But that's back to NVC. That's exactly the point. Is that it's like there is a huge difference between your emotions, which are intrinsically not bad or good or wrong, like not good or bad. They're emotions. There are things that happen in your mind. They create scenarios or not. They make you feel happy, sad. There are a plethora of emotions. And actually, it's funny because the NVC, the School on Nonviolent Communication, provides a huge document of all the possible emotions. If you want to deepen your vocabulary instead of just saying I'm sad or I'm happy, like you can use actually way deeper emotions to better describe what's happening in your head right now. And it's very fundamental to understand the difference between what you feel and how you're going to decide to act on it. And so the tool that this Marshall Rosenberg person described is that because you have to take ownership of your emotion, there is no possible way you can blame someone for it, and also there is no possible way you can make a demand to someone, because that's definitely not going to go anywhere interesting. What he claims is that your emotions that you're feeling, especially when they are negative, are triggered by a need that you have that is not being met. And that is fascinating to think about. Hello! Are you using this space?
Just go through the inside.
And the concept of needs is fascinating, because needs are things that people need in order to survive. So you cannot possibly have a need that's related to a certain person. Let's say like Jason and I are dating. Like, there is no possible way I would say, I need you to spend time with me. This is not actually correct in that definition of needs, because what I need is like need for comfort, need for being understood and known, that of course a like intimate person would provide after a certain length of relationship. So the special time we would spend together would happen to fulfill that need. But that need comes from myself, and everybody can potentially provide that to me, or it's my job to get it somehow. But I cannot possibly make a demand to Jason to fulfill that need, because that's my sole responsibility. It is okay to make an agreement with Jason that we are in a relationship and we see each other regularly, and hence can meet that need every so often, and that is okay as long as it's consensual. But as soon as there is a demand, as soon as there is coercion, there is a lack of consent, and then it becomes non-ethical. So that's why the notion of need, in my understanding, is extremely important, that it cannot possibly be tied with a certain person. It is, I mean, the only person it can be tied to is yourself. So you yourself have a set of needs of which you're supposed to be aware, and it takes a lot of freaking training to know what your needs are. Like, especially when you're a cis man in the society, you're trained to not be present with your emotions. As a result, you're trained to not very present with your needs. And also you're trained, when you have emotions, as a result of not being present with them, not having a single clue about what need isn't being met. So this whole tool, like this set of tools of NVC, is really about, when you're experiencing a strong negative emotion, sit and try to make observation and see what needs aren't being met. And the term observation is extremely important. Actually, they define that as the greatest sign of maturity, some Buddhists would say, or whatever. The tool, the power of being able to make a difference between observation and evaluation. And these are fundamental, and it's extremely hard to do. Like, I'm going to say it like this, you're going to be, duh. No, it is extremely hard. Like, the difference between observation and evaluation is like, you sat, the observation would be, you sat at a table next to your friend Jane, and whereas I was sitting on the other side, and the seat next to me was empty. The evaluation is, you obviously sat next to Jane because you didn't want to sit with me. You must hate me. What is happening in your head? What the hell? I mean, it's pretty interesting to see the difference between the two, because you have no actual clue about what's going on in your friend's head. You can never know what your friend thinks or wants or needs unless they explicitly tell you so, which would be practicing NVC. More of this later. But the thing is, being able to practice the difference between observation and evaluation is really about being able to tell the difference between what you can possibly perceive and know and what your mind is racing to create to fill the gaps. And when you're being jealous or angry, trust me, this one is extremely productive. Like, imagination blooming, all the possible scenarios, that's it. Like, they have orgies and they have all the best sex in the world without you because they don't want you, and because you're worthless and everything. Anyway, it goes dark pretty fast. And that's a very interesting thing, because once you're present with this distinction between observation and evaluation, I'm going to try and be consistent with which hand is which, but once you're consistent, once you're present with this distinction, then you can start working. You experience a bad feeling, a feeling that makes you hurt and sad, you can sit and revisit the list of observation that led you here. Discard the evaluation is not very important nor interesting actually, because you know it's just the product of your mind. What I'm saying now, it sounds easy, it is not. Once you've set your set of observation, you can investigate which needs aren't being met. So I have needs, okay, for being respected. I have needs for quality time. I have needs for love and touch and contact. And that need wasn't met when that specific thing happened. I have no clue what that person was thinking. All I can tell is that the person had certain needs that they decided that to fulfill these needs, they had to act that way. I have no idea if it was malicious or not. And that is very important if you want to practice compassion to someone. Because understanding the core root concept of needs is really about understanding what they say. It's kind of a little bit guru culty way of saying it. They call this seeing the life in someone else. Like what keeps you alive? And more understandingly, but like more obviously, like what set of needs do you have in this same category of the same listing of all the possible needs that I happen to have. And once you understand that everybody has needs and they are like not exactly the same, like you can balance your needs in different, like you can have more need for touch than others, but the core list of needs is always the same. And that's the thing that's fascinating, is that once you realize that, and you realize that that person was not just there to hurt you, not the whole world revolves around you. That person was trying to do something to suit their own needs. And they happen to make a mistake, or they happen to misgauge something, or whatever, and it happens to hurt you. It is way more useful to actually try and understand that person's needs that haven't been met and that made them do something a certain way, than to accuse them just using your evaluation about what the reason why they did that. So that leads me to the next element of nonviolent communication. We have feelings, we have observation, we have needs. So these are the three elements, which usually they happen in this kind of order. Like you have a strong feeling, do the observation about what happened, try to dig down to what needs weren't being met, and then you can come up with a request. And the request, by opposition to a demand, is something that can be said no to. And that extremely is important, because by seeing the life in someone else, by seeing the fact that they have also needs, they have a different agenda than you, then you can understand that they have also, like if you make a demand that they cannot possibly say no to, then there is no consent. And then as a result, there is no way you can possibly fulfill that person's needs. So, and if that person happens to say no to your request, then you can practice compassion and see which needs of them isn't being met by your request. And then you can work on together on trying to find something that suits both your needs. And sometimes it's not possible. Hey, life is life, it's not that easy. But at least you can do the whole process in a way that hasn't been violent a single time. And that is extremely important for... You made it!
By the way, no one's phone is connecting. I called like 3 people.
Oh no.
Sorry.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. No disrespect. Anyway, sorry.
We have, I have the Wi-Fi password there if you want connections, just somewhere on the table. Sorry.
Super cool. So maybe we'll check it out later. So yeah, these are the 4 elements of nonviolent communication in a nutshell. Really, to this is kind of this infinite loop of feeling, observation, need, request, and you practice this over and over, and it's extremely hard. And really, trying to be able to, before you can even make a request, you need to make a human connection with someone, and that already is extremely hard and takes a lot of work. And if that person is not willing to do it, there is very little you can do. There are tools to try to breach that wall that the person was set between you and I, but they are hard and they take practice. And NVC will not work if you don't have a connection, because if you don't see in each other's life in each other, like, there is nothing that can possibly happen. Or can you possibly make a request to someone who doesn't see you as a human being, and vice versa? So that leads me to, I mean, how long have it been?
Just keep
going. It's fine.
Okay, because like that was just like
It
one
doesn't
big
matter.
chunk.
My conversations will be really short. I can only give partial of my time.
Okay, cool. So also I forgot to say this, but like I have a bunch of stuff I like to blab about, like this one. I don't know if you noticed, but I've been blabbing. If you have any question, just like raise me your hand and tell me something. Like for this course thing, like I mean, I recommend like reading this freaking book. Also, Marshall Rosenberg is hilarious. He reads his own Audible, so if you want to buy it on Audible, like the red version is hilarious. Actually, that's how I consume my books these days because I commute. Anyway, yeah, so that's, and he has this puppet thing where he explains what's happening. He has this giraffe and this jackal or something, and it's all free and available online as well, so it's really fun to watch. But the point is, that leads me to polyamory, because NVC is one of the plethora of tools that these people use on a daily basis in order to handle what it is like to have multiple partners. So what is multiamory? Is the idea, so for many people, is the idea that we can have sex with multiple people. That's basically it. Because the main difference between monogamy and polyamory is the fact that it's okay to have several partners with whom you have sex. And there are several ways to tackle this, which is, when you're monogamous, usually, I'm afraid, it is because you try to follow a path that has been set for you. It is not because you have explored the thing and you know this is what you want. And there are...
Sorry, can I ask you a question?
Yeah.
Do your partners know each other?
I try.
Okay. So they don't have to know each other. Because I know some people, they're like three people, three partners, they know each other, so they are like partnered with each other. But I think yours is just one, like.
It depends. It's more complex than that.
Yeah.
It's most polyamory ethical books recommend introducing your paramour, your metamors. Sorry, metamors, not paramour. So a metamor is a partner of your partner. So is kind of your like cousin, I guess. Your cousin. Your step-brother, whatever. Your step-sibling, I don't know. Tell me. How?
Eskimo brother?
Yeah.
Eskimo brother, there you go.
But no, that's not the good way of saying it. Anyway, the metamor is someone who happens to date your partner. And in my opinion, it is very important to meet your metamors and have all your partners meet at some point. Because it's like, it helps a lot with jealousy, for instance. It's way easier to imagine a super gods, like sex god, Apollo, who's gonna like woo your partner away, and if you realize they are just human, and also potentially a very nice person. Already, for starters, you have a good thing in common. You happen to love the same person. How cool is that? So, and also it's good to have communication channels set up so that you can actually coordinate and split the time. It's good also to have usually share. I know a lot of people who have shared calendars with even their metamors, or even metamors of metamors, which is like, there is a whole thing called a polycule. It's like a monticule, you know, this tiny mountain, tiny hill. Well, the polycule is this huge heap of people who know each other, and usually like 4th or 5th degree of who dates whom, and it can create huge. And also, I've heard a lot of drama, such as like a ripple effect. When someone breaks up, then you have emotional support of emotional support of emotional support of emotional support, and you get hit by emotional support, even though like it's a
mesh structure.
It is very meshy, yeah. And depending on the people's like genders and sexuality and such, you can actually like have a lot of interconnection, and usually a big pile of friends, like people who work very hard together to try to make everybody happy. That's really the intent. And that's where the ethicality of things come by. And there are 2 books I would recommend if you want to poke into that. The go-to book to start with is called The Ethical Slut. It's a very good introduction one. They don't necessarily go deep into how to do it, but they definitely give you the baselines. And also they do a lot of work of deconstructing a bunch of sexist ideas that a woman who's promiscuous is a slut. And they try to reclaim the word slut as in, yeah, but as a result, they tend to not be very asexual friendly, and they tend also to focus a lot on the sex, even though polyamory is so much more than just that. So the second book I would recommend, which is more, it's thicker and it definitely goes deeper in the subject and actually tackles a lot of tools and ways to tackle this, is called More Than Two. I mean, and also there are so many other books that I have read some of them, but these are the two that definite. More Than Two, I think it's called A Guide of Practical Ethical Polyamory or something, but More Than Two is definitely you Google that. You type polyamory books on Google, the two first will be Ethical Slut and More Than Two. So More Than Two is better in my opinion, and it is way more ethical because I will repeat two rules through the whole book several times per chapter, which is no relationship is more important than the people in it, meaning that there is no way you can make a possible sacrifice for that will not meet your needs for the sake of a relationship. And it sounds a bit obvious once again, but actually it is not, especially not in society. Like the number of times where you have to sacrifice yourself for the good of the relationship in movies and such, yeah, no. And the second one is, the second rule is the one I mentioned already several times, which is people are not objects. But it's interesting because using these very simple rules that destroy very, even within the poly community, very, very common tropes such as hierarchy. They destroy hierarchy. They're just like, it is not okay to have a hierarchy in your relationships. If you try to prevent someone, like if you're a married couple and you try to prevent someone who's coming into your couple from certain rights or certain possible growth in their relationship, it's like trying to control the weather. I mean, trying to control someone's feelings. Like, no, the relationship develops a certain way. And trying to prevent someone from interacting with someone else in fear that something will happen is likely to break someone's heart. And it's really, and also trying to set up a set of rules between your spouse and yourself that affect other people without their consent is coercive. So the only thing you can do, and they destroy rules the same way, because making rules that affect other people without their consent is non-ethical. The only thing you can do are agreements that the people who agree to are the people who are directly affected by it. And the agreements are meant to be renegotiated and extremely clear and absolutely agreed on by everybody. And the whole point of being clear and agree on these things is that it's harder to call someone out for betraying you by breaking an invisible rule, which very often happens in monogamy, especially the default one. I mean, there is one monogamy style that I really, really enjoy, I recognize, is the conscious one. The one when you clearly define with your partner the forms of intimacy you want to be exclusive about. And you clearly define that you agree on it because you want to, not because society told you so, which is way harder than you think. And because like even among the default monogamous world, sleeping with a friend in the same bed is not okay, even if you're just cuddling, or cuddling is not okay. Or for some other people, kissing on the mouth is okay without cheating. And it's kind of implied, at the same time it's not. And the horrible thing with implicit rules is that when A breaks an invisible rule, B will be hurt because the invisible rule that is broken, and A will be hurt because they didn't think they broke any rule because it was invisible, and everybody's hurt. So that's why, back to the commitments, you make them clear, and also you don't make them like affect anybody who wasn't present during the conversation. And that brings back to the hierarchy, which is a hierarchy, and more explicitly the veto right, is horrible. Like giving your spouse a veto right, means that you give someone the right to break your heart and someone else's without any reason. And that is deeply unethical. Like, why would you ever do that? The only reason you want to break with someone is because you decided to do it, and the other person did. But no third party should ever make you break up. Like that's once, like back to the Middle Age where you had like family is telling you that, oh no, he's not rich enough for my daughter, so hence I should forget this thing. And then they say, okay, and then they marry, and they marry rich, and they're sad their whole life, and it's, yeah, well, you've seen many stories like this. And then sometimes they try and they die, and it's Romeo, whatever. But the point is, so that's why they really try to emphasize the fact that, yeah, and I mean, let's skip this. Let me rephrase this in a better way. It all boils down to trust. When you commit to someone, making rules to prevent that person from doing other things, like if you don't trust them to respect the commitments, they will not respect the rules. Like we're talking about adults here, and they have their own free will, and they will do their thing. So the only thing you can do is trust them. And if you don't trust them, no rule will ever change that. And that's why if you go to monogamy just by default, and if you go to monogamy by telling them, I don't want you to have sex with anyone because I'm afraid that if you have sex with someone, you will develop something that will destroy a relationship. You're not doing this for the sake, for your happiness or the happiness of your partner. You're doing this out of fear, which is not necessarily a good reason to do anything. However, if you trust your partner to want this relationship with you, and anyway the relationship is going to grow, and even if they meet someone with whom they become extremely involved, they still want to be with you. If they come back to you all the time, this is what matters. This is not preventing them from a potential happiness is not the way to go, because if they want to go somewhere, they're not going to do it. And if you don't trust that, I mean, if you don't have the trust, then you can't do anything. And if you trust them and they break that trust, that's a bigger problem. But no rule can potentially prevent either of these things from happening. So that's why my take on monogamy is that it is beautiful and it's definitely a good thing, but do it consciously. Do it because you want to. Don't do it by default, because that's how drama happens. A lot of people mention STIs as a problem, having multiple partners, to which I will reply that yes, having multiple partners does augment the chance of having STIs, even when you protect yourself, which is usually the case in polyamory communities. There is this fluid bonding, FB, thing that they talk about a lot, but usually you do that with only one partner, maximum two, and everybody knows and consensual about it. Very few people do it. Usually you do that with a partner with whom you live.
Excellent. Can you explain what fluid bonding is for the group?
Oh yes, sorry. Fluid bonding is when you stop using condoms with someone, basically. But that's a whole conversation that needs to happen. And anyway, when you're polyamorous, usually you talk a lot before having sex, like disclose previous partners, current partners, STIs, past STIs. Let us check exactly which STIs were being checked during the thing. It's a whole conversation that needs to happen. And everybody should do that. Anyway, I mean, depends on your comfort level. But the reason why I mention the STIs in general is the fact that because you're polyamorous, you know that there are different partners. When you're monogamous by default, especially when you start dating someone, there is this very gray area sometimes, especially in the US culture, where you sleep with several people until you kind of have the talk, and then you become girlfriend, boyfriend in a very heteronormative way. I mean, I date cis men, so that's kind of weird to think about, and cis women, but anyway, and everything in between. Anyway, the point is that during that thing, there is a whole moment when you have plenty of partners, actually. When you're single, you potentially have sex with many people, even in a monogamous relationship. But the problem is that you can be fluid bonded or not, and you don't really talk about it, and there is a whole status quo consensus thing, and the fact that you don't talk, the fact that you don't know, is always riskier than knowing. That's the thing. Like, if you expose yourself to the threat of not knowing what's happening in someone's life, then that's how drama happens. To give you an example, if you're fluid bonded with your monogamous partner, and you're monogamous by default, and hence you exercise jealousy as a tool of oppression to try to control your partner and give them roles to prevent them from going elsewhere, if one day they cheat, not only they won't tell you, not only it might happen for a long time, but also they might not use protection. and you will never know about it. And that's way riskier to have sex with someone who has unprotected sex with someone else you know nothing about than to actually know what's happening and always be consensual with your own level of safety. That's the reason why, in my opinion, it is way safer to be polyamorous in a very consensual and knowing manner than monogamous, where 90% of the time there is cheating and that happens in a dirty way. So if we do your monogamy in a very consensual way, not driven by coercion, and everybody trusts everybody, that actually already lowers the risk of cheating a lot. But and monogamy and polyamory, there are cheaters in polyamory too. That happens when you don't disclose certain things to your partners, and that causes the same problem as cheating as everyone else. By the way, I thought it was obvious, but polyamory is not cheating. That's the whole point. You can cheat in polyamory, but that's definitely the thing that everybody works on not doing. So that's the whole point
How do
of
you
it.
cheat in polyamory?
When you don't tell your partner what you're doing.
Oh, when you sleep with someone that you don't tell your partner you're sleeping with someone?
Yeah, if you have an agreement that you need to disclose your, because especially for sex, it is important then to be able to consent, to give full consent for sex. It is important that you know the information you need to know for your own boundaries. And most people want to know the sexual partners of your partner in order to have consensual sex. I don't know if you've seen this horrible movie with Jennifer Lawrence and the guy from Parks and Recs in space. Passengers. Thank you. I will make the premise of the movie that it's a guy who wakes up and everybody's Christianized, wakes up a woman whom he has intent to, lies to her about the fact that he woke her up, they are alone in this ship, and managed to seduce her into having sex. I call this a rape, because she did not have the information that she needed to give consent. If she had known that he woke her up, she would never have wanted to have sex with him. And hence, he broke her consent repeatedly. And that's a rape. That's a definition of a rape, like having sex without consent. So a lot of people argue with me that's not the case, but I want to face the fact that how horrible that movie is for that regard. And of course, the guy happens to be a good guy, so rape culture, yay! Welcome to America. But I mean, it's very present in France too, so don't get me wrong. Like blaming the victim is definitely something we do in France all the time. But I digress. So that's why, yes, you can cheat in polyamory, as long as you fail to give your partner the information that your partner needs to know to give you proper consent. So, and that happens all the time, unfortunately. But all it takes is negotiation, NVC, communication, and proper trust and consent. Yeah, well, all these beautiful things. Do you want to take a break? I could go through a few tools. Yes.
Yeah, I'm curious. So, in the polyamorous community, if you want to have a family, like how does that usually work?
Well, I'm actually currently building such a project with a partner who happens to be a cis woman, but we both have she's right now at her girlfriend. They spent the weekend together, and I have spent the night with a boyfriend last week. That was great. And we are living together, and we are in the process of trying to build a family within the next few years. And it works. Just building a family is yet another commitment. It is a huge one, as it turns out. But if you see it as a commitment perspective, if you see it as a commitment that two adults make together, it is a huge thing that requires a lot of trust, a lot of involvement, and a lot of determination. So if you're afraid that your partner, just because they have a fling for something, are going to drop your whole life away and break this huge commitment they made when they had this family with you, well, you can't really trust that person in the first place anyway. It's just yet another commitment, except it's a bigger one. But it actually works pretty well. There are plenty of examples of multi-amorous families, and actually the kids tend to there are not extensive research, but it kind of makes sense. You see adults being free, practicing nonviolent communication, being happy, providing, practicing consent on a regular basis all the time. And is it okay to introduce your other partners to your friends? Well, you can see it from a perspective of introducing a coworker. Like you have a coworker coming from dinner, and you change company. It's pretty frequent that they will never see that coworker again, and that won't traumatize the kids either. So, talking about sex with your kids anyway, most of the kids under a certain age don't want to hear about it. So you don't need to disclose that to your guests. Well, you told him, oh, I'm just like no, like yeah, like Papa and his friends are gonna gonna put you to bed and then gonna stay do something else. The kids don't need to know more.
And are you hoping to build a family with just one of your partners or multiple partners?
I just have one with whom I want this, but I'm open to the idea that they want the same thing with someone else one day or not, or like life is about change anyway. And
when you build a family, does it go through the marriage? Does it actually go through the whole legal process?
You can also. That's separate, but that's a decision a lot of polyamorous people make. Most of the time they do it for administrative reasons, right? For insurance or tax, privilege in general. It has nothing to do, but I have a few polyamorous, like my boyfriend actually told me that until the day he got married with his wife, most of his friends would not recognize that his relationship with his wife was serious. But that's because of society. That has nothing to do with and the reason why they did it was really to have insurance. Their commitments was between themselves. You don't need a piece of paper to tell you what commitments are. Commitments, like I said, are explicit consensual decisions made between two consenting adults. No piece of paper will ever change that. Yes?
So I got two questions. Number one, is multi and polyamory synonymous?
Multiamory is the name of the podcast. I'm not sure it's actually a word.
Got it. Okay. So then the second question is, for you, is there like a sweet spot in terms of number of partners? Like, is there kind of a range where you're happiest and like too many gets to be too much stress or too much work, and too few you're not fully fulfilled? Is it changing?
Yeah, it's really various. It depends on your chance encounters. It depends on the people you meet. It depends on whether you're looking for something or not explicitly. It's really because you're not superhuman. You only have 24 hours in a day. You also need time alone. There are many stuff interesting also. Nobody but you owns your time, so you cannot. Nobody can demand your time. It goes back to the consent and the ownership. So it is very hard to know. A lot of people I know. I have a good friend with whom I happen to have sex, who has 10 partners, but they kind of come and go, and she manages them pretty well, and she's actually very compassionate with most of them, but she is extremely busy, and also she is part-time. She has a part-time job, so that helps a lot. Right now, I would say, I mean, it's kind of hard also because if you consider sex as a specific form of intimacy among many, many, many forms of intimacy, then the line between friends and lovers is extremely blurry. And there are a lot of people try to consider the fact that your friends and lover are no different in terms of the way you should respect them and treat them. And so it's hard for me to tell you how many partners I have, because there are friends with whom I have sex, but not so often. So do they count as partners? So that's, like I would say 4. But I have one I focus a lot on, and I'm trying to strengthen my relationship with the others a little bit more, but I'm not doing a great job at this. I don't know exactly yet the sweet spot. I've been doing this for a year, and also like only recently, for 2 months, I've been identifying as polyamorous and actually cultivating the idea, because I had this toxic idea that I would be fine finding someone with whom I can be monogamous and drop everybody else, which is extremely bad. So it's only been a few months that actually I'm polyamorous and be like, okay, the state I'm in now, I'm gonna stay that way, and have people come and go. But so I don't know yet, the sweet spot. That was your 2 questions, yes?
Do you think this can change, like over time, from poly to mono?
Yeah, but the only...
Did you tell them your history, like in the past?
You and I?
How you're...
No, sorry.
From mono to poly.
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, for me, the only ethical way to go from poly to mono, like which way are you talking about?
Poly to
Either way.
Either way, so mono to poly is a whole process, and there are several chapters in most books just for that, because opening up your relationship is a process, and it depends if you come from cheating, which is already a huge trust break in your relationship. So how are you going to go from trust break to something that requires even more trust? So that's an interesting process. From poly to mono, the only ethical way to do it is when you only have one partner, and your partner also only has one partner. Asking someone to break up for the sake of your relationship is unethical on my book. So, but it's a process that a lot of people do. Yeah, like if you happen to be exclusive by the force of happenstance, then I think it's perfectly ethical to go monogamous again, if that's what you decide. Yeah. I just have a hard time imagining this because my partner happens to my main partner. I mean, I don't even like main, just the one with whom I have this project. Right? Hierarchy is problematic because my main partner does not have anything to say about my other relationship. They can explain things that make them uncomfortable, and they can express their needs, and we can see how we can fit that. But at the end of the day, I'm the one making the decision. So that's why there is no primary. Just the fact that we love each other very much and we love to spend a lot of time together. So we happen, and we also are deeply committed to each other. And these are the reasons why we do these things, and we happen to prioritize each other more. But not the fact that we had decided that there is a hierarchy. Did I digress from the question?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Further question about that, because I just think a little bit further about the kids born in those families. Are they tend to be more like open relationship, or is this kind of like relationship with the parents, or do they have to they're kind of like a sex orientation?
Once again, it's kind of hard to tell. Like it goes down to this argument that I really dislike. It seems close to this argument that I really dislike. Like people were afraid that gay parents would raise gay children. In my opinion, openness and empowering is opening and empowering to your children, and that's the only way. And they will do whatever they want to do, especially if they're free to do it. And the more exposure you give them, the better. That's why it boils down to. If you show your children are going to see a lot of monogamy. They're going to see a lot of toxic monogamy on TV already, no matter what you have at home. You can have a perfectly non-sexist home, and your children will be freaking sexist in this society. It's impossible to watch a porn movie. Like 99% of the porn movie, for instance, are incredibly sexist and not empowering to women. Because that's the industry, but if you do pay and look for your feminist porn channels and invest in them, you can find them. I digress. The point is, you cannot possibly shield your children from the toxicity from society. So you can only expose them to more. So in my opinion, the more out of the box you expose your children to, would it be from your familial structure or from the friends you introduce them to and everything, the more choices they have to make. That's me, yeah?
Within the poly community, do you see any intrinsic differences between men and women in terms of their wants, beliefs, and expectations?
Excellent. So because polyamorous are people raised in the society, there are many, many, many toxic behaviors that still transpire. Like coming from a swinger community, for example, which is not polyamorous, by the way, there is a strong, for example, a very toxic example is the fact that men are supposed to be straight and cis, and women are supposed to be straight and cis, except when a man is present, then they're supposed to be okay fooling around with a woman. So there is a very toxic dynamic, and if you watch a lot of porn, like for free on YouPorn or whatever, you can see this happening a lot. Like it is expected that women will attract to each other, then men won't, and it's extremely toxic. Because if you're a freaking like pansexual man like me, like you go to these circles and you're like, I'm not supposed to kiss any boy. This is great, but there is a power imbalance no matter what. So, but that goes down to the intersectional feminism I was talking about, which is all the system of oppression will enter your relationship. If you're white and your partner is black, there will be a power imbalance already. If you're a man and your partner is a woman, there will be a power imbalance. If you are rich and your partner is not, there is a power imbalance. and it's hard to work with your partner on being present with this system of oppression that pervades the society, and see if you can come up with way to empower each other in a way that makes everybody feel safe. But even in a monogamous relationship, heterosexual monogamy, this happens a lot, right? Like if you're a man, a cis man, you're dating a cis woman, there is a power imbalance, and it's extremely important as a cis man to educate yourself about this imbalance.
So what is that word you're using? Cis?
Cis, oh yes, sorry. I forgot to define cis.
How do you spell
Spells CIS.
CIS. Okay.
So when you use cis in front of a gender, it means that the gender you are, I assume you're a cis man, and you pronounce are he.
Me? Yeah.
I don't know.
Oh, I'm not even sure what cis means.
It's actually pretty rude to say what I just said, but the point is that it means that you were assigned male at birth, and you still identify as male. So to give you the Venn diagram, trans means that you do not identify as a person you were assigned at birth. Transgender means that you identify the person as the gender opposite of yours. And transsexual means that you actually took action on your body to change that. And you have a bunch of different things in the middle, because you can also block your development, especially when you're a kid, to be neutral and choose whatever you want. If you watch the movie that they showed at the Roxy Theater a month ago, they have a good example of that. That's pretty cool. But it's an intense movie because it's boring. But yeah, that's what cis means. It just means you're not trans.
Okay, and when you say the power balance being off between man and woman, what are you referring to there?
It refers to that's a huge topic. Are you aware that there is sexism in this society?
There's
Sexism.
sexism.
Sure, there is. However, in what I've noticed in between man and woman who are heterosexual, I think women typically women want the man to lead, generally speaking. And when men are not doing that, they basically are not attracted to the man, right? That's generally true, I think, in a heterosexual relationship.
That's way too generalistic for me to abide by it, but yes, that is a common trope indeed. Even though you can find millions of counterexamples to what you just said, it is indeed what the pervasive message is. And that's exactly what the whole idea of feminism is about. It's about educating yourself about the difference between a trope and what actually is. And what actually is that gender is a social construct. If you look down to the biology, there is all very little differences between men and women, and none that are behavioral by default. And that's extremely important. Like, women behave that way in a coy and reserved and silent manner because they've been raised to do it. Men behave in a dominant way because they've been raised to do it. It is kind of there are some natural biases, but my claim is 90% of that behavior is acquired, at least 90+.
Yeah, could you argue that like the hormonal differences between men and women can contribute quite significantly to like aggression, for example, testosterone?
Yeah, that is true, but you can learn how to control that, and that's not something that should, like, you can be raised. You can. I must be the least. I mean, I might be the least violent person you meet. You know, I mean, you don't know that about me, but and I practice karate, but I despise violence. It is one thing. Like, seeing someone raise a fist to someone else, like, almost makes me cry, and yet I have a lot of testosterone. Yes, I have violence in me. Does that change my behavior? Like, this is different. This is something I've been raised to not be. So once again, the way I've been raised completely like shapes for me, and 90% plus of the way I am is the way I've been raised. It has nothing to do at the end of the day with the testosterone that's in me. I have been beaten up by a partner who is a cis woman. I would not reply because that's against my thing, and like, that person had no testosterone per se. So that doesn't mean anything.
Going back to pornography,
yeah.
What are some of the main differences between like the more mainstream pornography that you're saying is more sexist versus the feminist like pornography channels?
There are a lot of cool things that I like. For example, there are the feminist pornography channels will actually not focus on PIV, penis and vagina. So, definition of sex, in my opinion, is not PIV. Sex is very broad. I kind of restrict it to the idea of having consensual, intimate touch, and that's everything in that regard can be sort of sex. But PIV is just one of the many plethora of ideas of sex, whereas in pornography, the mainstream one, you definitely have huge emphasis on that. What I really like about feminist pornography is that they tend to emphasize the human connection between the two people and like see how sexy that can be, like building intimacy, talking to each other, laughing together. I don't know if you've ever been to a Tantra workshop or read a little bit about this. This is super fun to learn about. It's really about being goofy together, having eye contact, like eye gazing, and you're present with each other. You switch from one rhythm to the other. You basically dance together, except that you're in bed. But it has nothing to do with like, woman, lay there, spread your legs, let me pound you, and we will stop everything as soon as I ejaculate, which is basically the trope, right? What I like about feminist porn is that it explores everything else, and real sex is about consent, and that you don't have any consent in porn in the way that, not in the industry itself, right? I'm not saying that the actors are not consensual. What I'm saying is that what's portrayed is not consent. Like, the way I have even PIV sex is that I'm always extremely present with the reaction of my partner. I always try to have a smile on their face, and if there is no smile on their face, I stop what I'm doing and I check on them with trying to see what's happening. And if we can move or something. You never see this in regular porn. You don't see something where the regular porn is the man does the thing and places it all the way, or does the thing and then makes her come. I don't even like the idea of using.
I like the American accent.
I don't really like the idea of making someone